My name is Evelyn Maddox. I'm 39 years old, former military intelligence. Now just a woman in a black dress standing in front of a polished oak table, being told once again I don't belong. The man at the reception desk barely looked at me before shaking his head. I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the guest list. He said it with the kind of finality that didn't invite discussion. I didn't argue. I just looked past him. Through the glass doors behind him, the lights of the main hall spilled like floodlights over the stone floor. Inside, I could already see the rows of men in dress whites medals glinting under the chandeliers. At the front of the room, my brother, Lieutenant Commander Luke Maddox, was laughing. My father was beside him, spine straight, like it always had been, like no weight in this world could ever touch him. My mother adjusted Luke's collar the way she used to fix mine when I was 6. Back when I was still small enough to believe that love had room for 2 children, not just one. I turned back to the officer at the desk and nodded politely. It's fine, forget it. And I started to walk away, but then I heard it. A voice sharp and unmistakable cutting through the murmurs and music behind those doors. Who let her in? I stopped. It was Luke's voice. Louder now, disbelieving, defensive. A pause. Then another voice, lower, older, calm, but thunderous. That's her. She's the one who saved us. In an instant, chairs scraped. Boots hit stone. I turned back slowly, eyes adjusting through the glass to the image I never thought I'd see. 100 SEALs all standing in silence. No applause, no commands. Just a stillness that thundered louder than anything I'd ever heard in uniform. Then the commander stepped forward, Darius Langley. Retired, decorated, impossible to ignore. His eyes met mine across the room. And he said clear as steel, "That's her, she saved us all." Inside my family froze. My brother, once so proud, looked away. I didn't move, didn't blink. I had waited over a decade for someone to say my name in a room that mattered. Now it echoed without me even opening my mouth. The officer at the desk straightened. I am sorry, ma'am. Please go ahead. I walked in, slowly, deliberately. Not toward anyone but past everyone. I felt the weight of 100 gazes, some respectful, some stunned, a few ashamed. And I understood something I hadn't until that very moment. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like silence breaking in the middle of applause. Like standing tall in a room where they once erased your name. Like watching the man who wrote you out realize you wrote yourself back in. But this story isn't about that moment. It's about everything that came before it. The choices, the silences, the betrayal, and the quiet war I fought long after the missions ended. Because the truth is, this moment wasn't given to me. I earned it. They all saw me walk into that room tonight. But no one ever asked why I left it in the first place. I wasn't always an outsider. There was a time when my name was printed on every manifest, every debrief memo, every operation ledger, right where it belonged. But then it disappeared. Not in ink, not in ceremony, in silence. The kind that seeps through cracks and settles behind closed doors. The kind you don't notice until it's the only thing that answers when you speak. I used to wear a uniform too. U.S. military intelligence, 11 years. Top 4% in strategic threat analysis. Clearance levels high enough to know what no one else dared to say aloud. I didn't fight with guns. I fought with code. I found patterns in chaos, quietly, efficiently. I helped prevent what never made headlines. And that was enough for a while. My brother Luke wore a different kind of uniform. SEAL Team 9, front line, decorated, loud. Everything our father had ever dreamed of in a son. He didn't just carry weapons. He carried the family's legacy on his shoulders. They called him unstoppable. A warrior. I was the one they called when things needed cleaning up afterward. No one applauds the person behind the curtain. Still, I didn't resent him. Not at first. We were never rivals. Just orbiting the same system with very different gravity. But something changed. One mission. One miscalculation. And everything unraveled not just in combat, but at the dinner table in the hierarchy of love, in the way my name stopped being spoken altogether. But I'll get to that. What matters now is this. When Commander Langley said she saved us all, I knew what he meant. But no one else in that room did. Because no one had ever asked, what did I save them from? Not enemy fire, Not a collapsing building or a downed bird. Not the kind of danger that gets carved into metals. I saved them from a lie. From a decision made for ego, not intel. From a man who thought his stars would always outshine the facts. And why did they stay silent all these years? Because the truth is heavier than the story they built. Luke became a hero. My silence made that possible. That night when the SEALs stood for me, they weren't just honoring what I'd done. They were acknowledging what they'd ignored. I wasn't on the list, but I had been once, until they found it easier to erase me than to face what I knew. This is the part of the story people never want to hear. The kind that doesn't fit into award speeches or polished bios. Because I didn't fall from grace, I was pushed, quietly, efficiently. And just like the threats I used to track, I disappeared before anyone even noticed. But I kept the files, and now they're going to hear every page. I come from a family where silence was mistaken for discipline, and obedience was mistaken for love. My father, Everett Maddox, served 2 decades in the Navy SEALs. He never raised his voice because he never needed to. His presence alone filled the room like a command. Even after retirement, he wore structure like a second skin. Up by 0500, shoes lined by the door, lawn cut at perfect angles. And if something didn't belong, he removed it. Quietly, with precision. He believed in 3 things: order, strength, and legacy. My mother, June, was a different story. She wasn't weak, she was silent. There's a difference. She ran our household like a backstage crew, everything working, nothing seen. I don't think I ever heard her speak above a whisper. Not out of fear, but out of habit. She was a military nurse, worked long shifts at the VA hospital, then came home to a husband who never really asked how her day went. And then there was Luke. Luke Maddox, my older brother by 19 months, was the blueprint. Athletic, charming, assertive in all the right ways. By high school, he was already running laps around the rest of us, literally and metaphorically. He got into the Naval Academy on a legacy letter and a perfect record. And my father glowed. Not smiled, glowed. Luke wasn't just the firstborn, he was the first everything. First to win trophies, first to be saluted, first to be framed on the wall. When he walked into a room, my father's back straightened. When I walked in, the air didn't change, but I never envied Luke. Because envy requires the belief that you could have been given the same chance. I never had that belief. Not in that house. While Luke played war in the yard with model rifles, I sat inside with maps and cipher wheels. I loved decoding things, puzzles, languages, behaviors. To me, understanding the why was more powerful than knowing the how. By 16, I was reading declassified field reports the way other girls read romance novels. By 18, I had already applied for a military intelligence fast-track scholarship. I remember the day I told my father. He nodded once, said, "Well, someone's got to be behind the screen." That was it. No pride, no ceremony. Just the implication that I'd be useful as a tool, not a name. Luke, on the other hand, called me 07 for a week. Thought it was funny, and maybe it was. Until I realized he never once asked me what I actually did. Because in our family, real service meant boots on the ground. Everything else was support. It was a legacy written in framed medals and dinner table stories, where only one of us ever got to speak. Still, I followed the path I chose. I trained in surveillance analytics, counter-signal operations, behavioral threat modeling. I graduated top of my class from Fort Huachuca. I was deployed overseas twice by the time Luke got his first command stripe. But when he came home, they threw him a barbecue. When I returned, my mother left a casserole in the fridge with a post-it note, "Proud of you. Rest up." The irony wasn't lost on me, and yet I didn't resent them, not yet. Because I thought that maybe, just maybe, when I did something big enough, something undeniable, they would finally see me. Not as the quiet one, not as the shadow behind the star, but as Evelyn, someone who mattered. What I didn't realize then was this. In a family built on legacy, the only stories that survive are the ones people are willing to repeat. And if your story makes the others uncomfortable, it gets erased. But before they erased me, before they made silence my home, I had a name. And they used to say it with pride. After Fort Huachuca, I was assigned to the 310th Field Intelligence Division forward deployed high-clearance work, mostly black zone intercepts and real-time tactical support. We didn't just monitor conversations, we predicted behavior. One wrong interpretation could get an entire squad killed. One right call could stop an ambush before the boots even hit the ground. I worked in containerized units that shook when helicopters passed overhead. A steel chair, 3 monitors, endless static. No windows, no glory, no time for mistakes. But I loved it. The precision. The weight of knowing that what I saw in a satellite blip or a fragmented audio line could change the entire course of a mission. I wasn't behind the screen. I was the screen. Meanwhile, Luke was making headlines. His SEAL team had a string of high-risk extractions and raids that read like action movie scripts. One clip of him carrying a wounded civilian out of a burning compound made national news. My mother printed it out, framed it. Every time I came home, it was on the mantle. Above it, a shadow box of Luke's ribbons, medals, and deployment patches. Below it, nothing. No photos of me, no citation, no record I'd ever worn the uniform. Luke never noticed. Or if he did, he never said anything. But we weren't rivals. Not really. He worked one kind of war. I worked another. We were twin engines in the same machine until that machine misfired. That moment came during Operation Scythe. The objective seemed simple: intercept a suspected weapons transfer in Helmand Province. Multiple intelligence sources indicated the exchange would take place in Sector Delta, a known hotspot with variable terrain. My job was to monitor chatter and coordinate field intelligence with command. Luke's job: lead the SEAL ground team executing the extraction. That was the first time we were both assigned to the same operational theater. At the pre-op briefing, he walked in like he owned the air. His team followed like a formation of shadows. He saw me and grinned. Didn't know the 3/10th cent family. Didn't know SEALs took orders from someone who used to get nosebleeds in altitude, I replied, half smiling. He laughed. The others chuckled. It was easy then. Too easy. We reviewed drone footage, heat maps, and signal reports. I flagged one anomaly: an encrypted signal spike not aligned with previous activity in Delta. It suggested a bait pattern, a trap. I submitted a risk escalation, advised delay. Command didn't push back, but Luke did. He argued the window would close, that waiting meant letting the enemy regroup, that we've trained for worse with less. The SEALs backed him. His tone made it sound like hesitation was cowardice, and when you're a Maddox, cowardice isn't allowed. In the end, Luke convinced the oversight officer to greenlight early movement. I didn't push harder, didn't raise my voice, didn't pull rank because I didn't have any over him. Instead, I updated the tactical support file, highlighted the discrepancy, and watched the dot representing his unit move forward on the screen. That was the last time I saw it blink. Within 23 minutes, the comms went dead. Within 40, medevac reports came in. 3 KIA, 5 wounded, 1 MIA, and Luke. He walked out with a bruised shoulder and a story about how things went sideways. Command accepted it. I didn't, because I knew what no one else did. The location was wrong, the signal was right. And Luke had chosen ego over evidence. That was the night our paths stopped running parallel. That was the night they crossed, then broke. One of us would move forward in the spotlight. The other would be asked to disappear, and I let them ask. But I didn't say yes. Not really, not forever. It started with a blip, a single encrypted ping on a signal band we hadn't seen in that sector for over 6 months. The kind of anomaly you're trained to spot then flag, especially in a region like Helmand, where terrain lies and patterns deceive. I was on the night shift inside the FOB's tactical trailer, eyes red from too much caffeine and too little air. The walls buzzed with generators. Every screen had a flicker. But my cursor froze the moment that signal came through. I ran a protocol sweep, cross-referenced the transmission with prior chatter satellite telemetry and behavioral trend modeling. The ping wasn't random, it was placed, like bait. The more I mapped it, the clearer the picture became. Whoever was on the other side of that signal wanted us to move now, and they wanted us to believe it was urgent. But they were too clean, too well-timed, too perfect. It was a setup. I crafted a report before sunrise, titled it plainly, Operational Deviation Risk, Recommend Hold. At Oro 700, I walked it over to the planning hut. Luke was already there, standing in front of the ops board like it was his personal stage. The rest of his team was gathered around, some sipping instant coffee, others stretching like it was a gym warm-up. I handed the file to the command liaison. He scanned the first few lines, raised an eyebrow, then passed it to Luke. Luke read it out loud. Advised delay of initial advance due to signal inconsistency indicating possible enemy misdirection. He smirked. So now static is strategy. I didn't laugh. I stepped forward. The signal isn't random. It mimics patterns we've seen before from AQ cells. They're trying to herd you. Luke leaned against the table, casual, confident. They always try. That's why we hit first. I shook my head. Not this time. The signature is too exact, too intentional. If you go in now, you'll walk into their timetable, not yours. He picked up a dry erase marker and circled the drop zone twice. We wait, we lose surprise. We move, we own the pace. You move, I said, you die on their terms. There was a pause. The kind that hangs between two people who know exactly what the other is capable of and exactly what pride can cost. Then Luke looked past me. To the liaison. Command hasn't issued a hold right. The officer shifted, uncomfortable. No formal delay, no. Then we proceed. My jaw clenched. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a professional risk flag. He looked at me, calm, cool, unwavering. You do your job, Evelyn. I'll do mine. I wanted to scream. Not because he doubted me, but because he didn't even consider I might be right. But I stayed quiet. Because in that room surrounded by warfighters, silence wasn't weakness, it was protocol. Luke turned to his team. Gear up. We move at 1100, target secured by 1200, wheels up by sundown. The others nodded. No one questioned him. Why would they? He had medals, reputation, a smile that made people feel safe. I walked out of the hut with the report still in my hand. No signatures, no timestamps, no authority. Just a truth no one wanted to hear. Back in the trailer, I sat down in my chair, staring at the green blip marking their convoy on the digital map. It crawled across the terrain toward the new drop zone, toward the signal, toward the lie. And I thought, if something goes wrong, it'll be my name buried in the footnotes. Because even when you're right, if no one listens, it doesn't matter. I wanted to call Langley. I wanted to request override authority. I wanted to beg. But I didn't. Because I knew what would happen next. Luke would go. They all would. And I would sit there, watching, waiting, listening for the moment the map would stop blinking. It happened at 11:43 hours. I was in the intel trailer watching the convoy dots crawl across the map, each one blinking. At 3-second intervals crawling toward the zone, I told them not to enter. Then one of them disappeared. Not delayed, not faded, just gone. 3 seconds later, another dot vanished, and then the rest scrambled. On the headset, all I heard was static. Then a short burst. Then nothing. I stood up so fast my chair clattered to the floor behind me. The tech next to me looked over wide-eyed. What was that? I didn't answer. Because I already knew. The zone had gone dark. Comms were jammed. The satellite overhead gave us visual just in time to capture the smoke. It bloomed upward like a black flower unfolding into the sky. I opened the direct command channel requesting visual confirmation and emergency medevac response. My fingers moved fast and trained, my mind screaming. No one answered for 7 minutes. Then the first call broke through, broken, panicked, soaked in noise. This is Bravo 6. We're hit. Multiple casualties. We need evac static. Then another voice, triple IED. Ambush pattern. They were waiting for us. Waiting. Just like I said. I felt my hands shake, but I kept moving. I coordinated extraction vectors. Pulled new satellite routes. Rerouted drones. All with the cold clarity of someone pretending they weren't hearing people die in real time. By 14:20, the first evac bird had landed under fire. By 15 hours, the survivors were on the tarmac. 3 were dead, 5 wounded, 1 still unaccounted for. And Luke. He walked off the helicopter like it was just another Tuesday. A bruise on his temple, dust on his vest, no limp, no panic, no shame. He looked at me, pulled off his helmet, and said, "Well, that escalated." I said nothing. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Rough day in the office, huh?" Then walked away, like nothing had happened. That night, I stood at the end of the medical tent reading the casualty list. Petty Officer Jimenez, KIA, Specialist Harlow, KIA, Lieutenant Marks, KIA, Chief Petty Officer Briggs, Critical, Corpsman Avery, Missing in Action. These weren't numbers. I'd eaten with them, debriefed with them, watched them laugh over instant ramen between shifts. Gone. I should have said something louder. Should have pulled a higher flag. Should have gone around Luke, around Command, around everyone. But I didn't. Because I didn't have the rank, didn't have the title, didn't have the legacy. And because part of me still believed they'd listen. Later, Luke gave a mission debrief. Formal, detached. Enemy presence was underestimated. Losses, while tragic, fall within wartime margins. There were no procedural violations. I sat in the back of the tent. No one mentioned the signal I flagged. No one questioned why they advanced early. No one even asked what intel was used to greenlight it. When it was over, I followed him outside. "You knew," I said. He turned, raised an eyebrow. "Knew what? That it wasn't ready? That we didn't have enough?" He shrugged. "There's never enough. That's why we train." I stepped closer. "People died, and people always will," he said. "That's war. You don't get to pick the perfect op. You move, or you miss." I stared at him, searching for something: remorse, reflection, even discomfort. There was nothing. He patted my arm again. "You did your part. Can't save everyone." He walked off into the night, and I stood there, alone, with the sound of rotor blades fading into the dark, and a voice in my head whispering what no one else had the courage to say. This wasn't just a bad call. It was a preventable one. And now it was mine to carry. Grief has its own rhythm. It doesn't hit all at once. It seeps, like fog under a closed door. After the explosion, I didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't cry. Instead, I worked. The next morning, while the others attended the ramp ceremony for Jimenez, Harlow, and Marks, I sat alone in the back of the Intel trailer, eyes locked on 3 screens, headphones over one ear. Not because I was ordered to. No one told me to analyze anything. In fact, no one expected me to do anything at all. But I couldn't let it go. Something didn't sit right. Luke's version of events sounded rehearsed, too clean, too aligned with the post-op summary that Command issued before the dust even settled. They said the mission had been approved based on updated intel, that the change in timeline had come from strategic adaptation to shifting enemy patterns. That phrase kept echoing in my head. Strategic adaptation. I knew the wording. I'd written it in reports myself, only when the data actually supported it. This one didn't. So I started digging. I pulled the original comms log from the day before the operation, cross-checked it with the time-stamped sitreps and drone telemetry reports. At first, everything looked correct. Too correct. That's what tipped me off. I'd learned long ago that real logs, unedited logs, have fingerprints, gaps in timing, small lag delays, occasional latency. But this one was seamless. No stagger, no shift, no chatter discrepancy. It had been sanitized. I opened the raw server cache. Buried beneath layers of archived metadata, I found a mismatch. The official op order had a timestamp of 0300 hours, but the internal system showed the draft was generated at 0114, then manually overwritten at 0317. No accompanying authorization. No matching record from Command. No cryptographic hash to certify the change. Someone had altered it. Only one person had access to both the field tablet and the mission board within that time frame. Luke. I stared at the screen as the weight settled in my chest like stone. He hadn't just ignored the intel. He rewrote the narrative. He changed the time of the op, then altered the logs to make it look like it had always been the plan. And no one questioned it. Because who would he? Was a Maddox. He was a SEAL. He was the son of Everett Maddox, the golden boy, the war hero. The system trusted him by default. They trusted me to make noise quietly. And I had stayed quiet. I minimized the window, backed up the raw metadata to a secure drive, encrypted the folder under an alias only I would recognize, and slid the device into the lining of my duffel bag. No one saw. No one asked. That night I sat in my cot, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the hum of the generators and the low murmur of men trying to forget. And I knew the truth wouldn't bring the dead back, but it might stop the next funeral. Luke had made a choice. Now it was my turn. I waited 3 days, not because I wasn't ready, but because I needed to be sure. Sure that no one else was going to speak. Sure that command had already closed the book. They had. The casualty investigation had been declared resolved. The official file was sealed. No further inquiry, no fault assigned. Luke's statement read like a textbook case, mission adjusted based on operational risk. All protocols followed to the best of command judgment. And that was that. 3 men were buried under a story Luke had written. So I wrote my own. On the 4th day, I sat at an unmonitored terminal in the base library, slipped the drive into the USB port, and opened the encryption shell. Inside the original op order, pre-altered, the manipulated file, metadata trails, time logs, drone path overlays, and a voice memo. Just a few seconds long, my own voice flat and steady. No one ordered the time shift. No chain of command approved it. This was altered after the fact. This is what really happened. I attached the entire folder to an anonymous webmail account, routed through 2 overseas nodes, and I sent it to the Office of Military Ethics. I didn't include my name, didn't need to. The data spoke louder than I ever could. When it was done, I closed the browser, ejected the drive, and walked out like nothing happened. And for a while, it seemed like nothing had. No one called me in. No one questioned my movements. No meetings, no alarms. The silence became deafening, but not unfamiliar. Then 2 weeks later, I saw him. Commander Darius Langley. He'd been out of sight since the aftermath of Scythe. Rumor said he was on temporary assignment in Qatar. But that day he walked right past me in the corridor outside the admin offices alone, unreadable, wearing his uniform like armor. He looked directly at me, not accusing, not surprised. Just knowing. He didn't nod, didn't speak. He simply held my gaze for half a second longer than most people ever did, then kept walking. That was when I knew. He'd read the report. No one else had said a word, but he had seen everything. And for a moment I thought he might pull me aside, ask questions, confirm details, even whisper something like, "We're looking into it." But he didn't. He said nothing, and in that nothing I understood everything. He couldn't move without leverage. He couldn't speak without orders. He couldn't act without the machine turning with him, but he could see me. And that was more than anyone else had done. That night I walked back to my barracks under the open sky, listening to the distant whir of generators and helicopters slicing through desert wind. The truth was out there now, in someone else's hands. Above my pay grade, beyond my reach, I had done what I could. And it might not be enough, but I had finally spoken, quietly, completely, without apology. And if the machine didn't want to hear it, at least I'd made sure it couldn't forget. 3 weeks after I sent the report, the bulletin went out. Lieutenant Commander Luke Maddox reassigned to non-deployable status pending leadership review. No headlines, no scandal. Just a sterile memo buried in the weekly update, between a vehicle maintenance alert and a note about water pressure on the base. The official language was vague. Routine evaluation of command fitness, following a cumulative operational review. Not a word about Scythe. Not a word about protocol violations. Not a word about doctored metadata manipulated logs, or 3 men dead. Because someone needed to be first through the door, I checked the ethics office portal that night. My report no longer appeared in the inquiry list. The case ID was gone, archived, sealed, removed, just like me. The next morning I received new orders. No explanation, no briefing. Effective immediately, Specialist Maddox will transfer to Administrative Analytics Division, Fort Gordon. Indefinite reassignment. Indefinite. That's the military's favorite way to say, "You're not fired, but don't come back." I packed in silence. No one came to say goodbye. Even the junior techs who used to ask me about surveillance code didn't make eye contact. Word travels fast when someone steps outside the chain. When someone asks questions they weren't told to ask. When someone threatens a name like Maddox. I boxed up my uniform, my field notes, my citations, what few I had, and sealed them tight. As I loaded my bag into the back of the transport, I looked once more at the tarmac, the sand-blown hangars, the half-assembled drones, the comms tower blinking red under a washed-out sky. Everything still moved. The machine never stopped, even when it chewed people alive. At Fort Gordon, they gave me a windowless cubicle, a shared phone line, and stacks of personnel data to scrub for inconsistencies that no one cared about. For 6 months, no one mentioned Scythe. No one said my name out loud. No one even used the word report in my presence. Luke, meanwhile, resurfaced, promoted quietly, given a training role, spoke at 2 leadership panels, cited in a journal article on combat adaptability. The story they told about him was the same one it had always been. Clean, heroic, untouched. Mine wasn't told at all. They didn't discharge me, didn't demote me, didn't threaten me. They just erased the room I used to stand in and acted like I'd never been there. And that's how systems survive. Not by punishing the truth, but by pretending it never spoke. I called home 2 days after my reassignment came through, not because I wanted comfort, but because part of me still believed that anyone might ask what happened. My father answered. He didn't say hello, didn't ask if I was safe. Just I heard about Luke. I waited, let the silence stretch. Then he added, voice low but sharp. They're saying he was pulled from deployment. Leadership review. Is that your doing? I didn't lie. I submitted a report, I said. With facts. That's it. He exhaled hard, like someone had just insulted his rank. You don't report your own blood. I stayed quiet. You think the brass gives a damn about you? You think they'll thank you for throwing your brother under the bus? That's your family, no, I said. That's your definition of family. He didn't respond to that. Just muttered, you don't betray your name, Evelyn. Ever. Then he hung up. I didn't call back. That night I got a message from my mother. Just a text. No punctuation, no emotion. I hope you're all right. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes. Not because it hurt, but because it said everything she wouldn't. Not I believe you. Not tell me your side. Just 5 empty words typed like an afterthought. I didn't reply. Luke never reached out. Not a call, not a text. Nothing. He'd gone quiet the moment my report touched oxygen. Vanished into whatever protective cocoon the system had built around him. And the truth, I don't think he ever considered that I'd speak up. Not because he thought I lacked evidence, but because he believed I lacked permission. That's what our family taught us. There is no truth outside the house, no air allowed in, no questions asked, and no one breaks formation. So I packed what was left of my things, booked a one-way flight out of Georgia, and moved into a small apartment 2 states away. No one asked for my address. No one asked why. No one knocked on the door after I left. And I didn't wait for them. Because when you grow up in a house like ours, you don't leave with noise. You slip out like a shadow. No goodbye dinner. No sit-down conversation. Just a slow fade from group chats and holiday lists until eventually, you're no longer expected. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just disappeared. Efficiently, quietly, like I'd been trained to do. I settled in Maryland the way a ghost might pick a house quietly and without ceremony. It was a 1-bedroom apartment above a locksmith shop, on the edge of a town no one outside the county could point to on a map. The kind of place where people nodded without asking questions, where strangers stayed strangers, and where silence was a language of its own. The landlord never asked why I paid 6 months up front. The neighbors never knocked. And I didn't mind. I spent the first few weeks waking before dawn out of habit. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, heart racing, waiting for briefing alarms that would never come. No intel updates, no drone feeds, no command center buzzing to life around me. Just an old radiator hissing in the corner and the soft thud of delivery trucks downstairs. For the first time in over a decade, I had no uniform, no badge, no access level, and no role to play. I was invisible, and it felt like drowning in warm water, peaceful but suffocating. I needed to anchor myself to something, so I enrolled. It started with one night class in cybersecurity protocols, then another. By the end of the year, I was full-time in a graduate program, surrounded by people half my age who thought hacking a school Wi-Fi password was the pinnacle of brilliance. I didn't correct them. I just sat in the back, answered only when called, and aced every exam. Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because my mind needed structure more than my body needed sleep. During the day, I picked up contract work. Encryption audits, dark web monitoring, small-scale threat analysis. Most of it was boring. Some of it was useful. None of it required a name. I was fine with that. The less they knew about me, the more I could breathe. I turned down interviews, declined conference invites, deleted LinkedIn requests from old colleagues before even reading them. The more I disappeared from the world, the more it left me alone. But I wasn't idle. While the jobs paid the bills, I kept working on something else, something I never told anyone about. I built a private dataset, a layered model of digital whistleblower networks, trust gaps in post-incident reporting metadata, manipulation patterns across branches. I coded until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. What I was building wasn't just academic. It was survival. A system designed to detect the kinds of silences that kill. By the time I finished my doctorate, I'd written a thesis no one would publish because it stepped on too many boots. So I archived it under a false author, uploaded it to 3 private servers in 3 different countries, and let it live outside of me. I didn't care about citations. I cared about what it might prevent. There were still nights when the past came clawing back. I'd wake up convinced I was still in the trailer, still watching that green blip disappear, still unable to stop it. Sometimes I'd hear Luke's voice in my dreams. Not yelling, just calm, casual. The way he said rough day in the office, huh? Like none of it had mattered. And some nights I'd hear nothing at all, just the sound of names being folded into flags and lowered into the ground one by one. But when the sun came up, I kept going. Not because I'd healed, but because I'd decided I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just living in the quiet. I was learning how to use it. It was a Thursday afternoon in early spring when I saw him again. I was at a tech symposium in DC. Not as a speaker, not even as a registered attendee. Just a face in the back of the room listening to a lecture on emergent threats and military-grade cybersecurity. I'd gone because I needed the mental stimulation, not the networking. But the universe in its strange humor had other plans. I was halfway through my lukewarm coffee when I heard someone behind me say, "Didn't expect to see a Maddox in here." I turned. And there he was, Chief Mason Briggs. I hadn't seen him since Helmand. Since before the blast that took part of his leg, 3 of his teammates, and most of the fire out of his eyes. He looked different now, leaner, older, using a sleek carbon fiber prosthetic beneath tailored pants. But it was his voice that stopped me cold. Still steady, still quiet, still full of the kind of weight that only comes from carrying too much for too long. He sat next to me in the empty row like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't speak at first, neither did he. We watched the screen together. Lines of code, maps, diagrams. Then he said, "I read your thesis." I blinked. I never published it. He smiled faintly. "Didn't have to. Someone leaked it to our internal thread. Took me 5 minutes to figure out who wrote it. I didn't deny it." He glanced down at his leg. Tapped it once lightly. "You were right," he said. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. "I warned them," I replied. Quiet. Not bitter. Just tired. He nodded. "I remember. You flagged it. You flagged it early." There was a long pause. Then he turned fully toward me and asked the question I hadn't let myself need to hear. "Why didn't you scream louder?" I looked at him. And in his face I didn't see accusation. I saw regret. "Because I thought the truth would be enough," I said. He exhaled slow. "Yeah, that was your mistake." We sat with that for a moment. Then I asked, "You knew not at first," he said. "But we figured it out pretty quick afterward. The timing didn't match. The ground layout was wrong. Intel didn't add up. Then why didn't anyone say anything?" He didn't flinch. "Because the guy who made the call was a hero. A Maddox. And heroes don't make mistakes. Not on paper." He tapped the side of his head. "We were all just trying to stay in the machine, Evelyn. And the machine doesn't tolerate friction. It runs on silence. And blood." I swallowed hard. He leaned back in the chair. I should have said something. I still think about it. Every damn time I put this leg on. But back then I just wanted to survive the system. And that meant letting people believe the lie. There it was. The thing no one had ever said out loud. They knew. They all knew. But no one had the rank or the nerve to say it when it mattered. Only now, years later, when the fire had faded and the metals had dulled, was the truth safe to speak. I nodded, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "You still serving?" I asked. "No," he said. "Retired last year. Quiet exit. No speeches." "Same," I said. "Only no one noticed." He looked at me. "Well, I noticed." We shook hands, no ceremony, just two ghosts who once stood in the same blast radius. One who lost a leg, the other a name, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel invisible. I just felt real. I didn't expect to make it past the front desk. Even after the silence, even after the stares, some protocols are stronger than truth. The young officer looked flustered. His tablet still didn't show my name. He glanced behind him, searching for guidance. "Ma'am," he said again, "I'm really sorry. I just need confirmation. You weren't on the pre-approved list for security clearance." A voice cut through, firm and unmistakably authoritative. "Let her in." The room turned toward the hallway. Commander Darius Langley stood just behind the entrance dress. White's pressed chest heavy with ribbons, none of which he'd ever mentioned himself. The same man who once looked at me in silence after reading a report no one else dared acknowledge. His eyes hadn't changed. He walked forward, slowly, deliberately, and stood between me and the check-in desk. "Evelyn Maddox," he said, not asking, just stating. Then he looked at the officer. "She has clearance higher than most of us ever did, and she earned it." The officer straightened, nodding fast. "Yes, sir, of course, right this way." But Langley raised a hand, stopping him. Then he turned to the room, to the guests, the brass, the photographers, to the entire assembly of SEAL Team 9 lined up in rows, like pages of a story no one had finished reading. Langley's voice was steady, low, but it carried. "That's her." The room held its breath. He took one step forward. This woman decoded the signal that saved the rest of Operation Scythe from walking straight into a second ambush. Another step. She submitted intelligence that changed the timeline of extraction against orders. Another. She risked everything, including her own family's name, to stop what would have been a massacre. He paused. She didn't hold a weapon, but she saved every man in this room. And then it happened. A sound, soft at first. Cloth against chairs, shoes against carpet. One by one the SEALs stood, not out of ceremony, not because they were told, but because sometimes silence is louder than applause. And sometimes standing is louder than speaking. 100 men, all standing, some with scars, some with missing limbs, some who might never have walked again had I not spoken when I did. Langley looked at me once more. "You don't need to be on a list," he said. "You already saved the list." A few quiet chuckles from the back, but I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Because for years I'd asked myself if I'd done the right thing. For years I'd lived in exile, professional, familial, personal. But in that moment, the weight I had carried began to shift. Not disappear, but redistribute. To the shoulders willing to stand with me. I took a breath and walked in. I didn't clap. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I needed both hands to hold myself still. Luke stood on the main stage, a spotlight softening the edges of his uniform. Metals glinted like they were trying to outshine one another. His posture was perfect, shoulders, squared eyes, front chin high, like nothing had ever cracked. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now present the Medal of Strategic Valor to Lieutenant Commander Luke Maddox, whose leadership during Operation Scythe was pivotal to the survival of SEAL Team 9. Applause erupted. Long, respectful, reverent. Even the injured stood. Even Mason Briggs on one prosthetic leg placed his hand to his chest. Only I remained seated, not out of spite but out of something deeper. A truth that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. Luke turned slightly, nodding to the crowd, then glanced over his shoulder toward the large projector screen lighting up behind him. The MC continued. 10 years ago, Operation Scythe took an unexpected turn. The target had shifted locations. Timing changed. We almost walked into a second blast. I kept my eyes on the back of Luke's head. He didn't move, the MC's voice lowered, deliberate now. And yet there was a warning, buried in the system, flagged by one of our own. A report that was at the time anonymous. A ripple passed through the audience, not loud, but perceptible. A shift in temperature. Today the speaker went on, "We wish to acknowledge that anonymous report, because it saved dozens of lives, including our own." The slide behind Luke changed. A line of decrypted code appeared. My handwriting on the analyst overlay. My identifier partially redacted but not completely. Not anymore. People turned in their seats, one by one, quietly, slowly. Eyes found me. I didn't look away. I heard a name murmured in whispers. Maddox. That's her. The MC gestured toward me without using my name. She was never officially credited. Until now. Luke finally turned his head. Our eyes met, and for the first time in over a decade, I saw the exact expression I had imagined 1,000 times. Not anger, not shame, but something worse. Recognition, a slow, heavy understanding. Not of what I had done, but of what he had buried. He knew what this meant, that he wasn't the only hero in the room, that the report hadn't stayed buried, that someone had chosen to unearth the truth even now. His jaw tensed, his hands tightened at his sides. The applause didn't come this time. The room waited. The moment stretched quiet, exposed, unfinished, and I just sat there calm, still. Because after all these years, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just visible. And sometimes, that's enough. He waited until most people had filtered out, until the handshakes ended, the medals were tucked back into velvet boxes, and the flashbulbs had cooled. Then Luke came toward me. His steps were slow but not uncertain. He was still Luke Maddox, calculated, composed. Every hair in place, uniform, sharp spine, never bending. He stopped a few feet in front of my seat. You wanted to ruin me, he asked quietly. Not angrily, not accusingly, just asking. I looked at him. The brother who once taught me how to throw a baseball. The boy who climbed onto the roof with me to watch 4th of July fireworks when we were too small to stay up late. The man who walked into a minefield because he believed only in force, not signals. No, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I didn't want to ruin you, I repeated. I wanted the truth to exist, to not be erased just because it made someone uncomfortable. His jaw twitched. You should have come to me, he said. I did, I replied. You didn't listen, and people died. We stood in that quiet open hallway, just the two of us. The ceremony still echoed faintly from the main atrium, but here it was just silence. I didn't order them into a trap, he said, eyes sharp. I made a judgment call. You changed the mission time without approval, I replied. You ignored flagged signals. You buried the warning. He looked down. For the first time, he didn't offer a rebuttal. No justifications. No battlefield wisdom. Just silence. When he looked up again, something in his face had changed. Do you think I sleep at night, he asked. Do you think I don't replay that day 1,000 times? I stared at him. Then maybe this isn't about ruining you. Maybe it's about forgiving yourself for the truth, not for the lie. A rustle behind us. Our father. He stood at the edge of the corridor, arms crossed, but his eyes. They weren't angry this time. For the first time in my life, he looked at me without certainty. Not with disappointment, not with disapproval, but with something closer to confusion. Like the foundation had shifted under his boots, and he wasn't sure how to stand anymore. I nodded at him. No words. I didn't need them. He didn't nod back. But he didn't walk away either. And maybe in our family that was the beginning of a conversation. Luke finally spoke again. I don't know what happens next. Me neither, I said. But I meant something different. Because I did know this. For the first time, I hadn't been erased. And even if nothing else changed, if my father never said another word, if Luke never admitted what he'd done, this moment stood. Unedited. Undeniable. The applause had faded, but the truth stayed. As I stepped out of the hall into the soft early evening light, the murmurs and camera flashes fading behind me, a hand touched my shoulder. Gentle, solid, and familiar. I turned. Chief Mason Briggs stood there dressed in a navy blue suit, his prosthetic leg barely visible beneath the neatly pressed slacks. His expression wasn't proud. It wasn't solemn either. It was something softer, something heavier. Evelyn, he said. I should have said something years ago. I looked into his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a soldier trying to keep his posture. They were the eyes of someone who had carried a silence too long. I read the report, he continued, voice low. I knew it was you. We all did. But we said nothing. He looked down at the ground, then back at me. I told myself it was to protect the unit, that Luke had already suffered enough. But really? I was just afraid. He took a shaky breath. I didn't want to lose what little I had left. I nodded slowly. He didn't need to say more. I had lived that kind of fear. I had watched it settle into rooms like fog, thick, choking, and hard to name. You're not the only one who stayed quiet, I said. His jaw clenched. I wish I had your courage. I wish I stood up when it mattered. I paused. Then said the only thing that felt true. You're still standing now, I told him. And you're still alive. That's enough for me. His eyes glistened, but he blinked quickly. The same way soldiers always did, letting nothing fall. A few feet away, I saw Darius Langley. He stood near the row of flags, arms behind his back, posture perfectly still. But his eyes met mine. He didn't salute. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Once. A silent gesture from a man who had carried more truth than he was allowed to say. A nod that said, I saw you. I always saw you. Briggs gave my shoulder a final squeeze. Thank you, he whispered. I watched him walk away into the fading crowd, each step, deliberate, sure, and no longer burdened by silence. For the first time in years, my breath didn't catch in my throat. And in that quiet, in the echo of what wasn't said, I found something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Peace. Not the kind you wait for, the kind you decide. I didn't wait for the rest of the ceremony. There were still speeches to come, more photos to be taken, and awards that would gleam under perfect lighting. But none of that was mine. It never had been. I stepped through the double doors alone. The air outside was cooler now. Not cold. Just enough to remind me I was somewhere else, somewhere I chose. Inside, they'd saved me a seat last minute. Between a second cousin and a polite stranger who didn't know my name. But I hadn't sat in it. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore, because I had built my own. A table where silence wasn't rewarded. Where truth had a voice. Where integrity didn't need a spotlight to matter. And at that table mine, there would always be a chair for those who were left out of the photo. The ones who worked in the background. The ones who told the truth when it cost everything. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. No handshakes, no glances over the shoulder. But as I walked down the long corridor outside the auditorium, I noticed something. One by one, the seals, those who had stood for me earlier, turned to face me again. They didn't salute, they didn't speak, but they stood. All 100 of them. No orders, no script. Just a quiet line of men and women who had once believed I didn't belong and now chose to say otherwise without saying a word. I walked between them, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real, whole, seen. I had come alone and left not needing to be invited back. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.